Hello, and welcome to Grand Rounds for the Minnesota Regional Spinal Cord Injury Model System, or MINSCIMS, as we call it for short. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. MINSCIMS is funded by the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, or NIDILRR, through their Spinal Cord Injury Model System program. The purpose of the SCIMS is to support innovative projects and research in the delivery, demonstration, and evaluation of medical, rehabilitation, vocational, and other services to meet the needs of individuals with spinal cord injury. Next slide. MINSCIMS represents a partnership among the following institutions: Courage Kenny Rehabilitation Institute in Minneapolis, Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Regions Hospital in St. Paul, and the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. Next slide. Our community collaborators include Minnesota Spinal Cord Injury Association, Unite to Fight Paralysis, Get Up, Stand Up to Cure Paralysis, Paralyzed Veterans of America, United Spinal Association, and the North American Spinal Cord Injury Consortium. This system collectively provides a multidisciplinary continuum of care for people with spinal cord injury, including emergency medical services, acute care services, acute rehabilitation services, and post-acute injury services. My name is Dr. Kimberly Mondin, and I will be the moderator of today's session. I'm an associate professor and the vice chair for research in the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine at the University of Minnesota Medical School, and I am project director of the MINSCIMS. Next slide, please. A few housekeeping notes. The University of Minnesota has organized the CME for today's webinar. Please see the chat for information on how to record your attendance and claim CME credit for attending within 24 hours of the event. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the MINSCIMS website. To earn CME credit for today's presentation, please click on the link in the chat. Due to the number of registrants for today's webinar, we've placed phone lines on mute to reduce audio feedback. However, we welcome and encourage audience participation using the Q&A function. If you have technical or logistical questions, we ask you please submit those to the chat to Dan Kelly. We extend a huge thanks to those who work behind the scenes to make these grand rounds possible. Next slide, please. The title of today's presentation is Legislative Update on SCI Research Funding, and our speaker is Matthew Rodreick. Matthew Rodreick became an advocate and activist on behalf of the spinal cord injury community after his son sustained a quadriplegic injury from a swimming injury in 2008. He comes to this work with a variety of professional experiences, from healthcare management to youth work and community organizing to music performance and composition. His visionary skills, systems thinking, and bridge building capacity led the spinal cord injury community's effort to pass the Minnesota SCI TBI Research Grant Program in 2015 and continue to pass similar legislation in Washington, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, with a current initiative in Wisconsin, all modeled after the Minnesota SCI TBI Research Grant Program. These programs have generated over $40 million to research and brought the voices of SCI advocates to the decision-making table. Matthew has presented at NIH, the Society for Neuroscience, the National Neurotrauma Society, the American SCI Association, and many other conferences and symposia. He is currently the executive director of Unite to Fight Paralysis, leading a national team working to accelerate the restorative therapies for SCI. And I will add anecdotally that Matthew is a very busy man, and we are thankful for you for taking the time at presenting our grand rounds today. So at this point, I will hand it over to you, Matthew.
Thanks, Kimberly. Appreciate it, and appreciate the invite to be here. Happy to be here and happy to talk about the state of SCI research and policy. I'll just quickly say I do not have any conflicts to report, just to get that out of the way. I've titled this today, Proximity, Partnership, and Policy, with a photo of our recent symposium in Washington, D.C. and also to reiterate the ethos that um, or the ethos that our work springs from at Unite to Fight Paralysis, that we believe in proximity to the injury as a critical role in the partnership that ultimately leads to smart and effective policy. And that has driven us as an organization long before I took over back in 2017, but continues to be so. As you can see from this photo, there are a lot of folks with spinal cord injury, a lot of leading researchers in the field, clinicians, industry representatives, and even government folk from FDA and NIH, as well as funding organizations like the Nielsen Foundation and the Reeve Foundation and others. It typifies kind of how we try to work, and it's built into our name of Unite to Fight. That is our goal. So let me start with what I think most of you probably know is a victory that started from a threat. And back in actually a year ago, and maybe just shy of a year ago, when the continuing resolution passed through Congress, which was a carryover. In other words, our government often doesn't debate and work out how to actually deliver a new funding appropriation or bill. They actually just pass on what was done last year. And in that continuing resolution, the Spinal Cord Injury Research Program, which is housed in the Department of Defense under something called the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, or CDMRP, was a $40 million portfolio that was zeroed out. And as soon as we found that out, I called the organizations that you see on the screen here, and invited them to a strategy call to figure out, what do we do? How do we respond? And to their credit, we have facilitated those calls every other Friday ever since, give or take some holidays and meetings and things like that. And just recently, not $40 million, but $33 million was put back, and largely due to our efforts to get that funding restored. It's been a bit of a slog and difficult and challenging, but we're very, very happy that at least that little bit has been brought back in to the SCIRP program, Spinal Cord Injury Research Program. And I'll get into a little bit of why that's actually important as we discuss going forward. But I wanted to recognize a few things first before we do. At the federal level, one of the things that we recognized is that there's really not very much advocacy happening on the research side of the equation for spinal cord injury. I put a little asterisk there because there is advocacy on the part of NIDILRR, which is what this model system is housed under. And there's a small portfolio for research coming out of NIDILRR that's provided to each of the model systems across the country. But that's dwarfed by really the larger funding mechanisms for spinal cord injury research. And there's very, very little presence or voice, with the exception of a couple of voices that probably most specifically from the Miami project. And that was kind of a slow recognition for us, realizing that there isn't really a presence. And that's problematic. And in our discussions with the organizations in the previous slide, as we've been discussing how to strategize, and a lot of this leading up to very particular points of contact with Congress last fall and into the winter, and then most recently at our symposium just a couple of weeks ago in Washington, D.C., was this recognition that we need a unified national plan. Spinal cord injury is so, for those who have it, understand that the needs are profound. The needs for access to care, good care, access to return to work, access for getting off of what for many people who suffer a spinal cord injury is essentially mandated poverty. Not to mention research that will ameliorate secondary conditions and complications that shorten the lives of people with spinal cord injury, but also to restore function. And so this group that has been meeting really as a reaction to the elimination of the SCIRP program has evolved into a group that's really looking at how do we take all of the things that are related to spinal cord injury, unify them into kind of a singular plan that recognizes not scarcity, which historically where, some of you may know that it's a kind of, well, how can we fund research when people don't get good enough care, or they are, ending up with pressure sores that put them in a nursing home or can't get back to work. How do we appropriate dollars when there aren't enough dollars to go around? And that's partly because there's been a lack of a sort of national strategy. So I wanted to really put that up there as something that is developing. And alongside that was this recognition that we need better data. We need really good data and specifically better data than we currently have. And when I talk about data, I mean multiple things. One is the prevalence and incidence of spinal cord injury across the United States. We do not have good, accurate data for that. There is, out of the UAB, the University of Alabama, the National Statistical Center, which has some numbers for spinal cord injury, also the CDC, which are much lower than other organizations report, like the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, which has maybe an inflated number, which includes people not with spinal cord injury, but other sort of movement disorders that lead to paralysis. Some of the model system data is extrapolated from data within the model system, so it's not accurate. And we need better data to show something that I'll put up here quickly, and I should have put the second slide first. The slide at the bottom of the screen, or the graph at the bottom of the screen, comes from a publication, or is a manifestation of a publication that came out of an approach that we made to a neuroscientist at Texas A&M by the name of Jen Doolin. And we approached Jen Doolin about 2 years ago and said, there's really no easy interactive way to figure out what we've been funding in spinal cord injury research. And would you be willing to do a study, an economic analysis of the last, originally we said 20 years, but realized that 15 was a more manageable number, not to mention some of the fluctuations in research. So we helped Jen, brought 5 or 6 people with spinal cord injuries, a couple of them with good data science background. And Jen's trainees and students in her lab worked on this project. It was published last fall in the Journal of Neurotrauma. And we used that data to craft a couple of these graphs. And one of them is this recognition that we used in Washington, D.C. recently to say the economic burden that is placed on people with spinal cord injury and ultimately the government in budgeting healthcare is really outsized relative to the investment that is placed in research. And that's the graph that you see here. The red line recognizes how much money is appropriated. The blue tower is really the cost and that in parentheses dailies is disability adjusted life years. It's a measure of disability that the WHO uses, the World Health Organization. And so I show this because this was really, really compelling to legislator offices and to legislators themselves to see this data and recognize that proportionally it's really underfunded. And then the second graph that you see up on the right side, and I'll explain, is really showing where the money is invested and by what agency. And this was also very compelling because one of the data points that came out of Jen Doolan's study was the recognition that 96% of all clinical trials, not clinical studies. So I want to make a distinction for those of you who aren't familiar with the science and some of the terminology. Human clinical research or clinical studies is one thing. A clinical trial formally is another. A clinical trial is an approach to move a discovery in humans towards approval so that it can be clinical treatment, which is different than, oh, I have an idea or a notion that I want to test in human beings and see if it works without any sort of strategy or plan to move forward. A clinical trial is very different. 96% of all spinal cord injury clinical trials were funded by the SCIRP program that we talked about earlier that was eliminated. And so this graph shows which agencies fund what kind of projects. And this was also very compelling to legislators because it was this recognition that if you look at this graph and recognize that the NIH has done a very good job, although underfunded, in funding basic research, early discovery research, to understand the pathology of spinal cord injury, to understand the biology of the human body and what happens after spinal cord injury, even prior to spinal cord injury, that there's been a lot of knowledge discovery. But NIH isn't the agency that will then take that further to vet it for human treatment. And so this was another very compelling piece of data in an image form that came from that newly released data. The next slide, if I can get there. Why can't I get there? There we go. This is just, again, extrapolated. This was sort of built off of Jen Doolan's data. One of our advocates, who is very responsible for a good bit of crafting this, by the name of Chris Barr, thought it would be a good idea to ask Grok, Elon Musk's AI tool, thinking that that might be compelling to certain conservative legislators. What is the value of the SCIRP program within the Department of Defense, now the Department of War, as it pertains to the combat veteran? And as you can see here, just really quickly, what Grok answered is that, number one, it's highly relevant, and so it was absurd that it was removed from the congressionally directed medical research program, which in the Department of Defense is focused on research that would benefit the combat veteran. And then secondarily, that it is way underfunded, which is that funding percentage slide, which many of them are underfunded, but spinal cord injury is one of a higher level underfunding. So this is just an example that I wanted to give you of what good and better data can deliver for us when it comes to making a public policy argument that's compelling. The other is, lastly, that I wanted to mention is this partnership that is necessary. And I'm just going to throw up a few slides here of our meeting, but mostly our trip to the Capitol. And the thing that I want you to recognize here is that some of these people that you're seeing, obviously there are people in wheelchairs, people with spinal cord injuries, But there are representatives here of research institutions, Drexel College of Medicine and Shirley Ryan Ability Lab and the Miami Project, Jim Guest in the left corner and Maya Hatch in the middle in Buffalo, Katie Velez from the company Anuvo. We had folks across the spectrum of the community join us at the Capitol in DC, totaling probably about 65 meetings with congressional offices with 16 teams of people, marked by their green T-shirts, which, if you didn't know, that color green is apparently the national color of spinal cord injury. Somebody pointed that out to us. We didn't know it. And we also put on people's T-shirts, the ones who wanted to wear them. Spinal cord injury can happen to you. And in essence, we had people with a Sharpie fill in how it happened to them and when. And we had a little disagreement about that, kind of thinking, well, isn't that a little macabre, like, or almost a little like threatening? And the response from the other staff, which is obviously we decided to go ahead and do it, was anybody who opens up their digital news feed on any given day, the algorithm is going to show you all the things you should be afraid of. What food should you eat to prevent you from getting dementia or being fat or having heart disease or getting cancer? How many steps do you need to walk to not get cancer? And so the agreement was, well, maybe we do need to remind people that anytime they step out the door of their house or even not step out of the door of their house, they could possibly get a spinal cord injury, and it can happen to anyone. It's non-discriminatory. But I wanted to show this to you because it's really important that we are trying to convene people across the entire spectrum of the spinal cord injury community to make our case and to put value back on the people who live with spinal cord injury. So I wanted to pivot and talk about here. So I'll just quickly say we did help to restore $33 million to the SCIRP program. But if you think about that graph that I showed recently, let me just go back really quick. Right there. If 96% of clinical trials are funded by federally funded clinical trials are funded by SCIRP, and it's $33 million. Clinical trials can cost anywhere from let's say roughly $2 to $10 million. $33 million is nothing. It's not enough. And so we landed on a figure that we are submitting, our staff are submitting appropriation requests this week to multiple congressional offices, particularly focused on what's called the HACD and SACD, House Appropriation Committee on Defense, Senate Appropriation Committee on Defense, so that we can raise that number. We went conservative with 50 million. So we are asking for fiscal year 27 that they would consider 50 million, which is still not enough, given that data point that I showed and given the Grok graph that I showed. But I just want to let you know that we are in a better place. We're not in a place that we're satisfied and happy with. We need more money, and we need significantly more money in that program. Not to mention other areas of influence that we brought up, which are NIH funding and also the FDA and the way in which they regulate. But those are sort of early stage conversations that we are having with congressional offices. So I wanted to pivot and talk about here in Minnesota. Because of the Minnesota SCI TBI grant program, the message essentially is the same. We have to keep making the appeal so that we don't lose ground. Again, I should have put again, because last year we did face a threat to drop the $6 million SCI TBI research grant program down to 1 million. And we fought back and we organized and we showed up at committee hearings and we testified and we got people to call and send letters. And unfortunately, it was dropped from 6 to 5, but 5 is quite a bit better than 1. But we can't lose ground. So the chair of the higher ed committee in Minnesota. In the Senate is Omar Fateh. The chair in the House is Marion Rehabilitation. Omar Fateh is a supporter. He has been a supporter. Marion Rehabilitation is not. Marion Rehabilitation was behind the effort to cut the program and actually would like to eliminate it in personal conversation with her. So we need to make the appeal. We have to do that with a unified voice amidst really significant challenges. If any of you have been paying attention to the news, you know that there is still a surplus, but a projected deficit coming in the next year. And also, you know this, that the Trump administration has attacked dollars that go to Medicaid. And that's going to profoundly impact, potentially impact people with disabilities more broadly and people with spinal cord injury specifically. We cannot, in my opinion, sort of fall into the trap of scarcity and start fighting amongst each other about where the money is coming from or going to. We have to think about a bigger pie. And that requires us to bring a unified voice together. The second is, or third, sorry, is not unlike the first, that we need better data. And some of that for you research scientists and clinicians, but particularly researchers who have received grants from the state program, we need better data from you. Many of you, as you can see, but not enough, 21 responses to our economic impact report on the state funding in Minnesota. U2FP has sent that out multiple times. I'm just going to remind you, we're going to do it again. We need you to fill out. It's not a very difficult survey to fill out, but what it does is show you receive money from the state program. What happened? What did you do with that money? And there's a series of questions of, are there people that you hired? Are there people that you have working that you were able to keep as a result of this money? Did you receive grants from other agencies to support that similar project, or that you developed something that you applied to other grantors, both public and private, that received investment? We are trying to show that there's a return on investment strictly economically, so that if money is coming into Minnesota, our assertion is that this program is catalyzing and nurturing programs that will draw more dollars in and feed the economy. So one is a simple economic argument. If the state puts up 5 million, it's our assertion from the people who have sent in, we can extrapolate, which is not easily defensible, but is somewhat defensible, that we're at a conservative 5-to-1 return on investment economically. We think it's probably higher than that, but we need more data. So if there are researchers on this webinar who have not responded to this survey, please do so when you see it come again, or you can reach out to me and I'll send it to you specifically, because we need this to make a compelling argument. This one is a little more difficult and nuanced, because beyond the economic argument is another argument, and it's the assertion that we are investing in an area of research that will translate into meaningful treatments or the amelioration of secondary complications for spinal cord injury. This is at the root of an effective partnership, we believe, between the research community, the clinical community, the spinal cord injury community, policymakers, and funders. That our argument to the legislature all along in the preservation of this program and the programs that we have passed in other states hinges on the promise that this is going to matter to people with spinal cord injuries. And I don't want to scare anybody, but I will say this, that in Ohio and Pennsylvania, where we have similar funding mechanisms structured similarly to Minnesota, we are beginning to get pushback because in those states, it has not delivered on that promise. it has become a little bit of a just, oh, there's some extra money here. And I can get some extra money as a research scientist to do the stuff that I want to do. And our conversations with them, most recently, last summer, we had about 40 people, mostly researchers, maybe about 6 or 7 people with spinal cord injuries, on a Zoom call from Ohio, talking about that the Third Frontier program in Ohio, which is a part of higher education, which is where our bill is housed, the $3 million program, is consistently asking us every year, when are we going to see something spin out that's meaningful? Like, when are we going to see a company come into the third frontier that we can incubate? When are we going to see a treatment that you promised? And so our message to those researchers was, look, it's time. If you have anything that might be a go, no go decision, and you need someone to nudge you to that go, the time is now, or we may lose this funding mechanism. Now, one thing I want to mention, this is very nuanced, and I'm going to end pretty soon because I wanted to stir up conversation more than listening to me talk, is in Minnesota, it has worked quite well because Minnesota spinal cord injury research was not as competitive 10 years ago as it is now. In Ohio and Pennsylvania, Ohio, if you were to look at Jen Doolin's study that I mentioned earlier, is in the top 3 of states that have received federal funding for spinal cord injury research. Pennsylvania is in the top 3 for getting money from NIH. In fact, in Philadelphia, there are more spinal cord injury labs per capita than any city in the world. So we didn't realize that going in, but we were catalyzing something that was already sort of winning at the game. And so what happened in Minnesota was that injection of $6 million every biennium, $3 million a year, which is not a lot of money, actually kickstarted a bunch of things that were very successful. And now, these years later, Minnesota has moved up the ranks of getting federal dollars for spinal cord injury research. And that data that I mentioned, Jen Doolin shows, is a manifestation of that. Now it is time to turn that into some impact. And that's why I have this. I was on a call just a couple days ago with the former program director at NINDS, Lynn Jakeman, who spoke at our meeting. She was forced to retire this past year by the administration. And Megan Moynihan, who is out of Case Western Reserve and used to work at the FDA. And one of my staff and I had a call with them to talk about NIH, kind of the national plan strategy, and FDA. And Jason, who works for U2FP, said, maybe it's time to come up with a new index for the H index to go to the I index, an impact index. So the H index, I mean, I'm not going to bore you. For you folks with spinal cord injuries who may not know, scientists in the field, academicians, are measured and held accountable by this H index, which formally is essentially how much money have you brought into the institution and where have you published and what kind of journals have you published in. Informally, also maybe where your students come from, where did your students go. It's kind of a measure of success as an academician, but it's kind of untethered from whether or not there's impact from your research. Impact meaning, do people living with spinal cord injury benefit from whatever it is that you've done? And that's the challenge that I think I'm sort of laying out for the future of the Minnesota program, which, some might feel a little uncomfortable about. But I think that's why I think it's necessary to mention because it is a kind of effective tension that we need in order to realize a very effective partnership between uh, everyone across the community. And I really truly believe in maintaining these kind of funding mechanisms to make the research competitive, meaningful, and impactful for the community who live with it. And that's why I wanted to throw this up. This is the cover from our symposium. We used the work of Jean de Zergenac, who's an artist in New York with a spinal cord injury. And this is another point of debate that we had within our staff because some felt it was a little too aggressive. If you notice, that is a mask made of catheters and is a very stark image, but it's also a very kind of true image to the experience of living with spinal cord injury. And that's kind of what U2FP, again, the ethos of us is making spinal cord injury sort of in your face and personal, because that's what we believe needs to happen. Back to that proximity, partnership, and policy. We are most proximal to the injury and need to be a critical piece and partner in making policy that is effective and moving the field further. And lastly, I added this photo as it relates to that because this was 11 years ago. It showed up on my social media feed. And this is kind of a bittersweet photo. I mean, it was a very exciting moment. You can see me off to the right laughing at something I think Senator Hoffman or Joey said. Senator Hoffman, as you recall, was shot multiple times last year, almost died. Melissa Hartman did die. Joey Carlson is now the editor of Access Press. Kelsey Peterson behind Rob Woodlick made a documentary called Move Me. Beautiful documentary that I think affected a lot of folks. Thomas Cloyd behind Senator Hoffman, advocate who's now gone on to a career in healthcare, sort of insurance side. I don't know exactly, but Thomas was at our meeting recently and rolled again in the Chicago Marathon, which the first time he did in his quad rugby chair. Rob Woodlick, many of you know, who's a member of the board of GUSU, Get Up, Stand Up to Cure Paralysis, was working in the model system at the University of Minnesota for a while. And in the middle there is Jenny Taylor, who died recently at too young of an age, but she's a high vent-dependent quadriplegic. And that's why it's important. That's why the personal matters. And so I thank you, and I would very much love to entertain your questions or any discussion you'd like to have as we go forward. And lastly, I would say if you have not subscribed to U2FP's newsletter as we approach this session in Minnesota, please do, because we will update you. I have already reached out to Senator Fateh to meet with him and talk about the upcoming session as the committees begin their deliberations. I would anticipate we are going to have some threats, and we are going to need your help to fight back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I really appreciate your presentation. I now invite everybody to, well, not everybody, whoever has questions, to put them in the Q&A and we can answer those. While people are sort of processing all of the information and thinking about things, I had a couple questions for you that I wrote down. First of all, the graphs that you showed were really compelling. I've never seen those. Are those published? I couldn't read the citation at the bottom.
The data is published. I'm not sure. I'll have to check with Jen whether she crafted those for the presentations that she's delivered. I'm not sure if they're actually in the publication itself, but I'll check with her to make sure.
And if you could ask if you could share them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, That would be great.
Yeah.
Um,
We just so you know, we had a ton of um, uh, graphs and images flying around as we prepared for our congressional visit. Those three that I put up there were a part of a larger leave behind packet that we gave to congressional offices. But it was pretty amazing how just about everybody we talked to was shocked by
yeah,
some of those graphs. One that I didn't show that was also very shocking is the WHO has, I can't remember what it's called. It's a part of the dailies, the disability adjusted life years, but it's a measure of the top 250 acquired disabilities. And it's a measure of sort of everything, not just economic. It's like quality of life, social connection, um, economics, economic burden. Spinal cord injury, cervical injury is number two. One of the worst things you can get on the planet, according to the WHO, is a cervical spinal cord injury, according to that measure. Number one is schizophrenia, which surprised some people, but if you are familiar at all, schizophrenia appears earlier. People live a full life, and it is devastating to everybody. Homelessness, addiction, violence, there's all kinds of things that come in tow with schizophrenia. But anyway, the point being that it's the second worst thing you can get in the world, according to the WHO, is a cervical spinal cord injury.
yeah. There are some questions in the chat. So, one participant said, how do folks in states without strong advocacy groups get started to talk to politicians?
um,
That was like a maniacal little giggle.
yeah. It's well, it's been, I guess the first thing I'd say is reach out to us. Um, uh, we we have formed a couple of groups that I think, if you're a person, I mean, actually, it doesn't matter what community you're from. If you're from the spinal cord injury or you're a clinician or researcher, reach out to us. We have now developed in the last year regular group calls. One of them is our federal Cure Advocacy Network call, which we formed leading up to our visit to the Capitol, but we are going to continue to do. And these are people from all over the country, even a few from Canada, where we talk and strategize about some of that. And many of the people on the calls are from states that have been very active, like Ohio, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Texas, Colorado, where we have made some efforts. Because it's complicated, but it's actually easier than you think. And there's kind of a format that we follow, and we'd be happy to share that with you and share resources. My laugh was a little bit like, a couple of years ago, I would have said, reach out and let's start an initiative. But now that we've gone federal, it's a little frightening to think that we don't have the capacity to do. We're a small, like very small budget organization, not a lot of people, not a lot of bandwidth, but we can certainly connect you and help you along. And if there's real promise, maybe it is something we can build the capacity for.
Thank you. And then Peter Braun asked, great presentation, Matthew. Always interesting to hear your view and vision. If you can please share the justifications from the legislator you met with for cutting the Minnesota SCI TBI program.
um, I don't really think there are any. I think the that person in particular and a few of the others that were so resistant is really simply the ideology of the government isn't the solution. Government isn't the solution, and we spend too much money. And that's why I put up how and why I wanted to really put a point of emphasis on the economic impact and also the impact for people living with spinal cord injury. And I'll just extrapolate because one is, the economic impact is the message I gave to legislators when I testified multiple times last year is you keep saying the word spend. We spend too much money. We spend too much money. And the choice, the rhetorical choice to use the word spend is disingenuous because it's an
It's an
investment.
investment.
You're investing. This
Yeah.
is the higher education committee. Are you not investing in the future of
It's
your state?
interesting because that's become the dialogue about research in general. I've
Yeah.
noticed over the last year or so is like, we can't spend. Research doesn't make money. We can't spend. And I'm like, we need to stop this narrative. It's an investment. We are not widgets. It's not an immediate return. You have to invest. Just like you have to invest in people,
Yeah,
individuals.
I absolutely agree. But there's also a little bit of tension
Yeah.
because, we had a congressional briefing in DC on our Capitol Roll Day, and we had really excellent presentations from Randall McCafferty, who's a neurosurgeon, part of the SCIRP program, Jen Doolin, again, who I've already mentioned, Murray Blackmore from Marquette University, and Melissa Miller, who runs the SCIRP program at the
Yeah.
Defense Department. And one of the messages kind of in there is that we as a nation, and there's a larger dialogue and it's super nuanced, but like as a nation, we have historically invested a lot in research, and it's been very important. But something happened in the 70s, and I don't want to go way too down a rabbit.
Let's,
Like
yeah.
in the 70s, some things pivoted about intellectual property and the way the academy is structured. And one of the things that happened is that companies that used to do R&D basically slowly over decades shuttered their R&D and loaded it all onto the academy. And it was a strain on the academy. But then what happened is there's a disconnect between what you're investing in
Right.
discovery and the translation
Yeah.
to treatment and clinical investment.
Right.
That translational infrastructure has withered in many areas, particularly in areas like ours where there's not a lot of private investment. And
Right.
so part of that dialogue is, yeah, we invest a lot of money, but what do we have to show for it? Because knowledge only gets you so far. And that's why I think this is really important about what SCIRP does and why it's not enough money. And even the questions that are happening at the NIH level, which are kind of frightening about the institutes and what we're going to invest in and not invest in, we've lost our way in a lot of space, both in the rhetoric, but also functionally. We need to see things that spin out and show recovery of function. And that's what, so the last thing I'll say is like in Minnesota, um, as a result of some of the things that were invested in, there are people who have made significant gains from clinical studies, clinical trials, and even treatment as a result of Anne Vanderwinkle's work or David Darrow's work or the Mayo Group's work, like Peter, who asked the question, people who have significantly reduced their medication usage, who have significantly reduced their trips to the ER or hospitalizations, who have recovered some functions that have lowered the amount of catheters they use. Like these all translate into economic impact, but only if you build that translational infrastructure to get that knowledge into implementation.
Right. One thing I was thinking about when you were talking about the survey you're sending out to people in Minnesota who have received the state grants from the Office of Higher Education. I mean, this seems a little daunting. Is there value to doing that on a federal scale, or is that, or like per mechanism scale? Like,
Um,
like for the SCIMS or for DoD skirt, like what has come out? I don't, I don't know.
well, I
Maybe
think,
it's
I
maybe
mean,
it's too much.
yeah, I mean, we've used that data. Like it wasn't just Minnesota specific. It was Minnesota, Washington, Ohio, Pennsylvania,
Mhm.
because of, the mechanisms that we funded. So we were trying to make the cases there. Um, Other states have tried to do that. It is daunting, but I do think it's has value. If you can show, and again, it's the usefulness of Jen Doolin's work and that data, um,
How do you spell her last name?
Dulin.
Right.
She's a spinal cord injury researcher, neuroscientist, and but has done a couple of these sort of, off, like a little bit outside of her domain,
Sure.
and been really grateful to her. She did a previous study that was published in Frontiers with her PhD candidate Valerie Dietz, which was asking the question, um, are the clinical trials in spinal cord injury what people with spinal cord injury want?
Yeah.
And that was a really good study. And that was another one where we participated and had people with SCI advise on that study, which is why we went to Jen in the first place. So I think that the larger answer is yes. Um, at our meeting, for anybody who's interested, our the whole video recording will be up very soon on our YouTube channel. On the first, towards the end of the first day, we invited a guy named West Uvadias. He has a spinal cord injury and lives in Portland. He took it upon himself to do a prevalence and incidence study in Oregon. Got funded by the Nielsen Foundation, worked with state statisticians at the Department of Health and through some other like insurance groups to get accurate numbers. And what's really striking is that he did it very similarly to what I did way back in 2013, 14, using my knowledge coming out of working in a hospital, of working with MDH to figure out the accurate number of people who are living with spinal cord injury in the state of Minnesota. And if you take his numbers and my numbers, I know it's only two states, but then I did it in two other states, in Ohio and Pennsylvania. The number, the proportion of the population is within 1,000th of a percentage point the same. And if you extrapolate that, that's about 850,000 people living with spinal cord injury in the United States, not 350 or
Which is what, yeah.
365. It's quite a bit more. And you have to ask yourself, in the
That would
states
be
where
really,
there's
really
a higher
helpful
incidence, like California or Florida or Colorado or Utah,
because
like where people are
that kind of
skiing or surfing.
information in a publication would be
Yes.
so powerful for the significance section because
Yes.
that's often, especially NIH, it's kind of like, oh, well, this is such a small population, kind
Right.
of
Right.
let move along. That would be really, really powerful data
Yeah.
because all we have is, the National Statistical Center. So
Yeah, and the
that's
CDC,
what we
which
have
is
to
way
reference.
underreported, the CDC is not
Yeah.
good numbers.
So,
And that's why we brought Wes to our meeting. And our invitation was, to any of you listening, if you have a spinal cord injury and you live in a state and you want a job, like you want some work to do, that would be something worth doing. If we can start putting together data across states that show that and roll up into a larger kind of registry of spinal cord injury. I mean, it's always been a tension ever since I started working at U2FP back in 2012. Like we need a national registry.
Yeah,
And we do, but it was always like, well, who's going to do that? I don't have enough time. We have things we have to get done, like
sure.
not
Yeah.
preparation for things getting done, but having that kind of data would be really, really powerful.
Well, thank you for attending. I know you're extremely busy. Thank you for all the advocacy you do for individuals living with spinal cord injury, for clinicians, for researchers, for the field. It's invaluable. If anybody has any questions that pop into their heads later on, I'm sure Matthew would be happy to field those questions via email. If you, I don't know if you have it, but you can look them up on YouTube FP, I'm sure, website. Or you could put it in the chat if you want, Matthew. The recording again for this webinar will be posted soon on the MinSkims website with a link to our YouTube channel. And as a reminder, please see the chat for information on how to obtain CME credit for attending today's grand rounds. And at the end of the webinar, a brief 3-question survey will pop up. We'd really appreciate your feedback. And as we're moving into our next model systems application, any feedback you have would be helpful so that we know, what to hit on in that application. So please feel free to be honest in your feedback. And if you have any suggestions for presentations in the future, that would also be great for us. So, and we also now have a LinkedIn page. So, if anyone is on LinkedIn, please go ahead and follow the MinSkim. So, thank you again for joining and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.